And we're back. I'm your host, BKP. Good morning from the office, North Georgia's only live online morning show. Our next guest on the phone with us is Georgia House of Representatives Speaker David Ralston. Good morning, Speaker Ralston. How are you?
I'm well, Brian. Good morning to you.
I have two things I want to start out with, let me ask you this. How important was this session in a couple different ways? The fact that this actually will be the last session you preside over for Governor Nathan Deal to send bills to his desk. What was that like this year? And do you think you got through about everything he would like to see in his administration, or what was that like?
Well, it was. I have tried to generally support Governor Deal through his term. I think he's been a very pro-job governor. He's focused on economic development and bringing jobs into the state, and we've had some success in that regard. Around 700,000 plus new jobs in the private sector as a result of the efforts that we have put forth. And so this session was a little had mixed feelings. I'm happy for the governor and the first lady that they're going to now be able to enjoy a retirement. I think we're going to miss his leadership. I think Governor Deal evolved into a very strong leader. He tried to bring people together on a host of different issues, and so I think we are going to miss his leadership. I think in terms of this session, I think he got most of his agenda through. No session is ever perfect. I think on the whole, this was a very good session, and I think he was very pleased with it.
Well, I don't know that I'm going to use my words, controversial. I don't know that I see very many controversial bills headed to his desk that he would tend to veto. But one time before, early on when we started working together and I would interview you, I said, do you think the governor will veto this bill? And you let me know very quickly you didn't answer for the governor and you didn't know what he would do. So I'm not going to ask that question today.
You've learned your lesson.
Yeah, I did. I said, okay, all right. So, but let me ask you this before we get into some of the bills that passed in this session. Amazon was in town. Representatives of Amazon was in town Friday looking at some of the locations in some meetings, further in the discussions. What say you about that? Were you aware of them coming to town? Were you involved at any point? And what do you think is the next step here where HQ2 is concerned, possibly in Atlanta?
Well, I became aware, as did most people, other than the governor and his immediate staff, right before they came into town. These economic development visits they're not press events. I mean, they're there to give the potential business an opportunity to look at sites on the ground, to look at the infrastructure around potential locations. And so I think that they value their opportunity to be able to do this without an entourage of people or press. And so we knew that it was coming. Now, as to the next step, I suspect from what we're being told is that Amazon has already narrowed the list down to 20 or so locations, maybe a few less than that. We expect that in the next few weeks they will narrow the list on down to the finalist of perhaps 5 or even less locations. And that's then I think where the real competition will really begin. I've said from the beginning that I think Georgia has a complete portfolio of economic development attractions. We have the world's busiest airport. We have the intersection of three major interstate highways in Atlanta, and we've got great research facilities at the University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia State. We've got so much to offer, so I'm hopeful that we'll be competing in a very strong position for Amazon and even for others. I mean, we just landed a couple of weeks ago. We landed a data center that Facebook is opening out in the Walton-Newton County area. So there are other lower profile relocations that are coming that are not getting quite the attention, but I think are still very important to our economic future in Georgia.
Well, let me ask you this, one more thing. You said so much to offer, and earlier I said that your last legislative session with the governor, but has the governor not told you to be prepared in some form or fashion to come back into session if necessary to discuss possible incentives for Amazon? Is that something that is still a possibility of happening?
It's a possibility. The way he really framed it was we were going to take off different people doing different sort of incentives during the session, take all of that off the table, so that we didn't get distracted while we're one of 20, and let's wait and see if we make the final, I almost said the final four because we've been watching basketball, but the final few. And so he has indicated that his preference would be, and that he does have an interest in calling us back in if he feels it necessary, and he has committed to have discussions with the lieutenant governor and I about that when the time comes, once Amazon makes that decision.
Well, obviously, I know there's several candidates in several state races and local races that would prefer that session not happen until after May 22nd. Just say it. Let's move right along to what has taken place in the House. What are some of the top accomplishments, I'll say that, of the House this year? Talk a little bit about the transportation bill and some of the other bills as you feel are major accomplishments that came out of the session.
Well, as I said a moment ago, you always have people that want to pick and find fault in what you do, but I think you're going to have to look really hard to be able to disagree with some of the things that we accomplished this session. One of the things, and probably what I was most proud of, was the fact for the first time in 16 years at least, we have fully funded QBE, which means that all of the austerity cuts to local school systems that started back in the middle of the Purdue administration and have continued forward because of the economy and other reasons, they're now over. In fact, we're fully funding QBE, and so people say, well, what does that mean? Well, it's going to mean about $375,000 right off the bat to Gilmer County schools. It's going to mean about $285,000 right off the bat to Fannin County schools. And so that's significant. And I think that it means that we won't have to limp along anymore, with a partially funded system of public education here in Georgia. I guess the right close behind that was the tax cut that we were able to give. Got to give part of the credit to that to the president and his tax reform plan that he signed back in December that created a windfall for the states. We had some discussion about what was the best way to deal with that windfall here in Georgia. We decided to give it back to the taxpayers. So we cut the personal rate by a half of a percentage from 6 down to 5.5. We've doubled deductions so that Georgia families are going to really see the effect of this in their tax returns. This was the most significant tax cut that had been passed since, for I think I've been told 80 years in Georgia. So I was very, very happy with that. I was happy with the adoption bill. I think you and I may have talked about that at the end of last session, probably talked about it coming into this session. This was a bill that the House of Representatives passed last session in the 2017 session. We passed it 3 times unanimously, and then it got held up in the Senate. And the result of it being held up was that many of our most vulnerable children were caught up in the foster system for yet another year because of our inability to get something done. So I made that bill a priority this session, and it passed early on in the first couple of weeks of the session. And what it will do is it updates our adoption laws in Georgia for the first time in over 30 years. It will speed up the adoption process. It will knock down some of the barriers to adoption. It will make it easier for families to adopt. And I think that's very significant. We can talk about the school safety plan that we've funded in the budget. That's going to mean money for both the Gilmer system and the Fannin County system. Gilmer County will be getting about $52,000. Fannin County about $45,000 to install cameras, to put in new doors, to harden the physical assets at schools, so that we can assure parents that when they send their kids to school in our area, that we've done everything we can do to make sure they're going to be safe. So I think that was a very reasonable plan. I was very, very proud of that. I was proud of some of the local measures that we were able to get passed. I was especially pleased that the budget for FY19 will include $5.5 million for a permanent standalone campus for the University of North Georgia at Blue Ridge. I don't know if you know this, but that campus is the fastest growing campus in the UNG system. It's growing faster than Cumming, it's growing faster than Gainesville, it's growing faster than Watkinsville. Blue Ridge has really taken off, and I'm very, very happy about that.
I don't want to interrupt you, Mr. Speaker, but I just want to clarify something. North Georgia College campus that is housed in I guess, rental property up here on 515 going into Blue Ridge. You're saying that will now have a standalone brick and mortar school?
That's correct.
Okay. And how much is in the budget for that?
$5.5 million, and that's for construction only. The school itself is responsible for the purchase of the land, and my understanding is that they are they're getting fairly close to finalizing a deal to purchase land to put this on, so that we can have that identified and ready to go sometime soon after July 1.
They've not announced the land purchase yet that you're aware?
Okay. No. That's
well, for dual enrollment students and for core classes. It has been a positive. I have to say that. Let me ask you a question before we move on. That's a great announcement this morning. North Georgia College having a brick and mortar school right here in Blue Ridge. Let me ask you this. Last year you put together a rural Georgia study committee that went all around the state. What kind of legislation did that produce this year that came to the floor? What do you think came out of that this year that benefits rural Georgia out of that study committee?
Rural Georgia had probably the best year that it's ever had in any session of the Georgia General Assembly. When we set out to do the Rural Development Council, we undertook a 2-year project. And so the members of that council started out in May of last year with having hearings around the state. You may remember they had a hearing in LJ back in, I think, August. They went all over Georgia, engaging with local leaders, business leaders, citizens, educators, medical professionals, and others about what it was going to take to really revitalize rural Georgia. And they actually brought back this year more legislative proposals than I had expected they would. We didn't get everything done on the on bringing high-speed internet to rural Georgia that we wanted to, but we made a lot of progress. We have knocked down some barriers to carriers being able to expand service. We have set up the framework of a grant program for the expansion of high-speed broadband into rural Georgia. And what we've been doing is we have actually stayed close in touch with the Trump administration and with Secretary of Agriculture Perdue, who has made this a real priority for his department. President Trump, I met with the president and some other local leaders at the White House back in February. This president is committed in a very strong way to infrastructure improvements in rural America, and those include, in his words, high-speed broadband, as well as highways and bridges and rail and other things. So we made a lot of progress on high-speed broadband. We've made significant progress on health care by changing the law in Georgia to allow micro hospitals, sort of using the model of Piedmont's facility in LJ, so that small towns in rural Georgia will have access to emergency care and overnight care before going on, if they need to a regional hospital. We have passed some measures to encourage physicians to locate in rural Georgia. We have created a center for Rural Prosperity, which will be housed at Abraham Baldwin College in Tifton, which will examine health care and other issues and will ensure a presence in all state discussions for rural Georgia. So I think it was a very, very good session for rural Georgia, and I was very proud of that. And and their work is only halfway finished. They will start again in May, having hearings, and I'm pleased to say that their first hearing of this year will be held in Blue Ridge. I don't have the dates yet, but I know it's in May, when we will have these leaders here in Blue Ridge to talk about the future of rural Georgia. And I think that's going to be a good couple of days for us.
Well, let me ask you this before we go. We only got about 3 minutes, Mr. Speaker, and those are some very positive things, especially in rural Georgia and especially in this area here, North Georgia Blue Ridge campus, North Georgia College Blue Ridge campus. But let me ask you this: like some of the critics, some of the critics might say, we didn't get a change. One of the hottest discussions out there is voter fraud and hacking voting machines and so on and so forth. But we didn't get a change in the Georgia election system this year. What say you? Why do you think we didn't get that change, especially with that issue being such a hot button topic nationwide?
Well, because we couldn't agree and reach a consensus on what alternative would be best in terms of voting machines. We didn't have the money appropriated, so we couldn't buy the machines this year. What I'm anticipating is that when we go back in session, or when next year's General Assembly goes back in session in January, that this will be a priority issue, and that there will be in the amended fiscal year 19 budget money for these machines. And I think
I loved that car.
I think you're going to see a lot of discussion and a lot of meetings over the rest of this year dealing with the issue of what do we want to go to as a state. Frankly, it was too late to switch voting systems for this election cycle. Makes a lot more sense to do it in 2019. It gives more time to train poll workers and local elections officials on whatever new machine we select. But there's still a real division of opinion out there about exactly what kind of alternative that we need to go to. We want something that is secure, that's something that we can know is accurate, and we're going to get that. But that's not an answer that we need to rush to judgment on.
One more thing. One more thing before we go, the budget, and it increased over $1 billion again this year. And I know we've talked in the past every year with the increase. Why the need to increase the spending budget of the state another $1 billion?
Well, because we're growing in population. If you go back and look at our budget per capita, we are still spending at levels from several years ago, but you can't take care of health care needs, of educational needs, of public safety needs, and do it on a budget from 10 or 15 years ago in terms of of real dollars. I think this is a very conservative budget. It's a very responsible budget, and if you need proof of that, you can look at the people who look at our budget process in terms of grading our bonds. We're one of only 8 states in the nation that have a AAA bond rating. So somebody thinks that we're doing a pretty good job of managing our finances here in Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We appreciate it. We appreciate always after the session closes, you taking the time to give us some updates on the session. We're sure we're going to run into you on the campaign trail here real soon up here in the district, and we appreciate you very much. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Brian. Hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Okay, folks, that has been a busy day, but let's leave with this, okay? Let's leave with this daily presidential tracking polls. The Rasmussen Reports daily presidential tracking poll for Monday shows that 50% of likely U.S. voters approve of President Trump's job performance. What say you, Joe Scarborough? What say you, Minka Brzezinski? What say you, CNN? What say any of you? I know what I say. I knew it all along. I'm your host, BKP. It's been a great show. It's 10 o'clock. We'll be back tomorrow morning.